Pam Kuckelmeyer, and I'm with the Equine Assisted Coaching Association, and this nice young gentleman next to me, his name is Luke Worth. And so I'm going to ask Luke some questions to help us understand some of the things that are happening in this world and go from there. So
excellent. Well, thanks for having me, Pam. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Luke. So how Luke and I met was actually on a social media site, and I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, it was through LinkedIn.
Yep.
And Luke reached out to me and of course sent a small message, and what I read, it's like I connected right away by what he sent to me. And he mentioned something about one of Bob Proctor's teachings on the fear, if you want to,
Terror barrier.
The terror barrier. So a lot of people are not familiar with what that means. And I thought, this guy knows what this means. There's not a lot of people that understand what that means. So I contacted him, and we sat and, over a cup of coffee, and we had something to drink, and then it just took off from there. So we've had a connection here and there since then. So Luke, if you wouldn't mind sharing, first off, this book that Luke wrote. And the book is very significant in more ways than one. And the book is about Luke sitting down with his grandfather and basically interviewing his grandfather about his life. And there's a lot of real life stories in here, and it sounds as if Luke was inspired and his life took off for a big amount of reasons because of his grandfather. So, and the book is titled Sometimes Your Purpose Finds You. So, Luke, can you tell me a little bit about this book and how this came about?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was, throughout my whole life, I've kind of been very close to my grandfather. And I remember telling him when I got back out of the Marines, I was building a new deck for him because him and my grandma, they needed a new deck, and they were so excited standing outside watching me build it. And he's always telling me these stories from when he was in war and stuff like that, but it really didn't come about until he was probably about his last 5 years of his life. My mom never heard these stories. No one else ever heard these stories. And I remember telling him, I said, Grandpa, I said, I'm gonna write a book on you. And he's like, no, Luke, you don't have to do that. Like, I'm not that important. There's people with better stories than me. And but the cool thing was is I could really look back and see the big picture with all of his stories and how they all pieced together, whereas he couldn't necessarily see that. And so what ended up happening was he ended up passing away. At the same point in time, I was transitioning out of my job at Kohler Company, starting my own business. And things kind of went south for me. And I like to say that there's ebbs and flows to life, and for every valley, there's a peak just as high as that valley is deep. And so that's kind of what I was going through as a learning curve. And what ended up happening was I was, at the lowest point in my life, and I started writing this book. So I said, well, I told my grandpa I was going to write this book, and I never did it. So Luke, you better do it right now because you have nothing else to do. And so I went to the Mead Public Library, and I just sat down and I just started writing. And the interesting thing is, as I started writing, all of it kind of really came together quite fluently. For instance, you've read the part of the story where my grandpa went off to his draft into World War II, and he ended up on this ship, going from island to island up into the initial invasion on Japan. And in the process, he had a very inventive mind, a very creative mind, and he decided to build this little ship, this vessel, because he was sick of the bouncing off the waves of these flat-bottom boats. Mm-hmm. So he went to the maintenance shops, ended up taking one of these tanks that he found in the recycling bin, cut it out, and convinced his buddy to go out on the water with him. And it just so happens that he gets in the water and with his buddy, and this big wave hits him, and the thing tips over. And my grandpa couldn't swim. It's ironic that he built the boat, though, right? I mean, it's kind of interesting. And he said he remembered as he was sinking in the water, he seen this gold flicker dropping away from him, and he knew it was a Boy Scout medal he earned years earlier. And he reached out, but as he reached out, this man, this big German man that he was with, grabbed him by his collar and yanked him back up onto the boat. And the relevance of the story in my mind as it relates to his life is that years prior he was here on the Sheboygan Falls River, or Sheboygan River, and he was a Boy Scout at the time, and he heard screaming off in the distance, and what ended up happening was he came and checked it out, and sure enough it was his buddy drowning. So what did he do is he didn't know how to swim at the time, and so he crawled out on a limb and kind of laid his body down by holding on the limb and let his buddy climb up his body up onto the branch and end up saving him. Well, that's where he got that gold medal that he lost in the Pacific that day. And so I look at Earth as the causal plane. So for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. That pertains to thought as well, on the metaphysics level or the fourth dimension or whatever you want. You may know more about that than I do. But the fact that he was experiencing this karmic adventure in his life, so he saved somebody and he got something for it. And then when he was, drowning and ready to die, he had to give up what he got to be saved again. And so that connection was just so crazy how that all happened.
Yeah. And there was one point in the book, there was another story. Yeah, like you said, he's building this like boat out of leftover scrap on the maintenance pile. And as he's doing this, and there's other things, like you said, that he invented, like the rifle, which was useless on dry land, unless when you were really close to the enemy, that wasn't very useful. So he took it upon himself to cut that rifle down, to shorten it, where it was a handheld gun, so to say. And during this, when I was reading this, what was hitting me was like, well, how can he build this mini boat and just go on to shore by himself with another another sailor, so to say? And that just kind of struck me kind of unusual, because, and then with the gun, like, how can you just cut off the barrel on the gun and then make your own gun? Where's the supervision with this?
No, that's a very good question. He's always been kind of a rebel since he was a kid. So, I mean, that was, I think, part of it. And I don't know if the standards were as stringent back then. I imagine they were, but I imagine he found a way to, to kind of still be creative.
Yeah. So, and I think where this comes into, too, your purpose finds you. Do you find that contributed to you? Like you said, your purpose found you then. So, do you think that contributed to that?
Yeah, so actually writing the book, and not even writing the book, but really giving the speech at my grandpa's funeral, I, at the end of it, everyone in the room stood up and they were holding a salute for my grandpa. And the inspiration that poured through my body, the spirit that flowed through my body, I mean, just that feeling I never had in my entire life. And that was the point that I was inspired. And when I say inspired, I mean in spirit. And so that's when I knew that was something that I needed, that was a calling for me. And that's when I said that was the day my purpose found me, and I knew that I needed to go out and speak. And that's when I started my own business soon after that.
Okay.
So,
and what business was that?
It's called Mindshift Pro, but basically the business was a personal development business. And my goal was, there was a lot of things I've learned throughout my life. One is the law of attraction. A lot of the laws of the universe and how they work. And when you understand how these things work, you can kind of not predict your future, but you can shape it much more easier. It's like being able to steer the ship, right? So I guess where I was going with that is I learned a few things, and it helped me progress throughout my career in corporate America, in the military, and everything I've done in my life. I don't know if you want me to back up a step and kind of tell you that story, or is it? Yeah,
there's a story that Luke shared with me some time ago about how he actually got a job at the Kohler Company too.
Yep.
That was part of it too. Yeah.
So that was quite interesting. So what happened was I just got out of the Marines and I was working at corporate America. It was probably one of the harder times transitioning from the military to corporate America, and I kind of hit a plateau. I'm the guy that likes to go vertical real fast, and that wasn't really happening. So what I ended up doing was I ended up meeting a man named Danny Belcher, which was a blessing in disguise. This guy was out of Georgia. We were on a lighting project together because the company I worked for was a lighting company. And Danny's got this long hair, these big glasses, big smile on his face, and he's like, Luke, did you ever you ever feel like something's working out there for you? Like maybe you're on a beach on vacation, you can just look up and you know that something's out there working for you. I'm like, buddy, I have no idea what you're talking about, but please tell me. And Danny's like, well, do yourself a favor, Luke. He's like, watch the movie The Secret from Rhonda Byrne and watch it many times. Read Think and Grow Rich from Napoleon Hill. Read The Science of Getting Rich from Wallace D. Wattles. Read Mach 2, Your Hair on Fire from Richard Brooks. So I did exactly what he said. I watched The Secret for over, probably 100 days straight. Every single night I put it on when I went to bed. And I read the books. And so I wrote it down in the present tense, my goal. I said, I'm so happy and grateful now that I'm an emerging leader at Kohler Company. And within, probably a month of me writing that down, I had my boss, a VP in the company who I didn't talk to in a long time. I had another director all recommend me for this Emerging Leaders program. So that got me in the door for the interview, but there's still hundreds of people I had to go against. But in my mind, it didn't faze me because I already had the goal in my pocket as soon as I thought it was mine. And so I ended up going for this interview. 2 weeks later, come to find out I'm an emerging leader in the company. It wasn't because I was better than anyone there. It's just because I had a goal and I knew where I was going. And that was simply it. And the other piece, obviously, is faith. So I had faith that it was going to happen.
Yeah, and what you talk about, too, reminds me of one of the later stories in the book about your grandpa when he came down with, is it tuberculosis?
Yes.
And then they put him in some type of a hospital, and a lot of the other of his buddies were in there too, and it's almost as if he was on his, it's harsh to say it, but it's like almost, they told him he only had a few years left to live or something like that. Yeah,
so that perfect timing, thanks for bringing that up. So the death ward, this is like right when he just got through the Pacific Coast Island hopping campaign. He thought he was going to come back home to his family. Come to find out, he gets called in for his last physical, and they told him he has tuberculosis. So now he gets sent to a death ward in New Mexico, where he lies on his back for 4 years, watching his friends get carted out behind, around him.
Yeah.
And that's where he went to basically die. But like you said, he embraced the law of attraction without knowing it. He embraced, his future without knowing it.
Yes.
So he built pictures in his mind of he had drawings of a barn. I wish I would have brought it along, but there's this sign that says Worms and Grubs. He had the sign of what he's going to do. He's going to turn that barn into a Worms and Grubs shop.
Yeah.
And he built these pictures in his mind of what was gonna what he expected of his future. And sure enough, 4 years later, he was.
Yeah.
Right there, yeah.
Yeah.
So, and I know you didn't live too far from there, I don't think, right, Black River?
Yeah, it was close. It was really close.
So he bought the barn that he wanted, he turned it into a bait shop, he had the kids he wanted, he married the wife he wanted.
Yeah.
It all seemed to fall into play when a lot of people around him, had much worse circumstances that came to fruition.
Yeah. Because if you don't mind, I'm going to read what he said in here. He said, the first year put me into a downward spiral mentally. I can recall looking out the hospital window as the medical staff loaded the dead bodies that I called my friends only a day prior. After a year of being burdened with extreme loss, I came to realize many of the soldiers were waiting to die. That's all they talked about. And look where they ended up, in the damn morgue. God bless their souls, as they were good men. But I knew that wasn't the way I was leaving that damn place. That was the day I realized if I was going to have any chance of getting out of that godforsaken place, I had to start with my mind. I would spend days staring at the ceiling, or so it appeared to the passing nurses. They would say, what happened to Walter? I was always the joker, but now I was quiet, or so it seemed. I learned to live in my imagination. I used my mind and built pictures so vivid you'd think they were real. I made pictures of the barn I was going to live in, the bait shop I was going to open, and the life I was going to live. It was in such detail that I even had plans on how I was going to make the nets I would use to catch the bait. Then I built my favorite picture. That was a picture of a family and a beautiful lady that would one day be your grandma, Luke. Smiling, he said, she was so beautiful, such a good lady, he said as he nodded his head, grabbing his heart, pained by the thought of her passing several years prior. He smiled a humble smile. He had been through a lot, but wasn't resentful. He felt blessed for what he had, and you could see it in his face. the withered skin of a humbled soul and the eyes of a man that understood the wisdom of life that I was so anxious to understand.
Thank you for sharing that. I haven't read that in a long time.
Yeah. I mean, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, that must have been so inspirational to you because, today in the modern day here, the personal development movement is taking over and science is backing up how this all works. So now you said you're moving also onto something new?
I'm looking at some new things right now. I'm still trying to find my path. I know my path is to inspire others. Mm-hmm. But I want to do it through a way of helping people improve their lives and their circumstances. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The challenge I run into is the whole acquisition of money and everything else because I want to do it for free. But I obviously have to make a living doing it, so I have to figure out that way of they say, like Bob Proctor says, willingly giving, graciously receive. So as long as you give value, you should accept in return. And if you're not accepting in return, then you can't receive. So it's this part of the cycle I'm still trying to work out. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, that's my biggest thing is get there and teach people, and people can do or have whatever they want. I have no doubts about that. I've seen it happen in my own life, look at your whole coaching program. I mean, where'd that come from? Where'd that start, right?
Right. Yeah.
Right in your mind.
Yeah. Never would have imagined something like that would have developed or manifested. So I can speak for that too. Yeah. So. Your grandfather was a huge inspiration, and it sounds as if he, after reading this book, I mean, there's a lot of stories in there, and I mean, I think it's just beautiful stories, how he found his way, and even after living through the Depression, and then he ended up in the war at 19.
Yeah.
And then he was away from his family, and then not knowing what to expect. I guess that's the other piece, is not knowing what's coming next. And I think that's what a lot of people struggle with, is not knowing what's coming next,
It's interesting, though. I think when you're in the downward spiral of life, sometimes you learn to live in your imagination like my grandpa did. Mm-hmm. And if you don't learn to do that, then things don't seem to get better sometimes.
Yeah.
And I learned that, too, at the same time when I was writing the book, because my life was kind of down here. And I'm like, Luke, where are your thoughts at right now? What are you thinking about?
Yeah.
And I had to change that thought process.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So what is one takeaway that you could share with the audience? I mean, you're so well versed. I mean, you were a consultant for Bob Proctor, and Bob Proctor was known as one of the forward thinkers of the personal development movement. I mean, Tony Robbins learned from him. There's other people that learned from him. I've had teachers that learned from him. Who are some of the other people that were influential in your life and helped you?
That's a really good question. I'd say, my dad, my stepdad, my family, everyone around me always inspires me. Okay. I mean, I'm not going to lie to you, I don't really hang around people that don't inspire me. Mm-hmm. It's just the way I've kind of been. My wife, my children, they've always inspired me. I think, one of the things, and maybe it sounds selfish, but I've heard Nikola Tesla, I was watching a special on him the other day, one of the great inventors of our time, and he created the electricity, right? The AC, alternating current. Yeah. And he said that one of the most enjoyable, most fascinating things of his life is the fulfillment of creating something. And he said that it's better than relationships, is better than a lot of things. And I don't like to say that because I think it's probably on an equal playing field, but that feeling of creating something from scratch and using your imagination and tapping into something that's much higher than you and manifesting it here, like that feeling is just something I've been chasing my whole life. And so when I'm not there, I'm always after it again, trying to find that way back to it.
Yeah.
So that inspires me a lot. It's just the whole creative process.
Yeah. So now your creativity is taking you into a whole nother level, it sounds like, and you're growing from your experience, and whatever's going to come of that is what you're going to be sharing with others.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I guess, and I think maybe the conversation we had today is going to guide me in the right direction, because knowing that you created the curriculum and the whole material for your program that's helping people all around the world, I think that's what I want to do as well. I just haven't taken that step. Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you, Luke. Thank you so much for sharing. It's been an honor.
Yes, likewise. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you, folks. I hope you have a wonderful day, whatever you're doing, and may you go out and find your life purpose. Thank you.